So Claudio, so we've spoken about data and addressable forever, mostly in terms of planning and targeting. But what about the whole closed loop of attribution? How does that whole cycle work?
Sure. So when you think about addressability, you're right. People tend to focus on the ability to target a message to an individual household or individual or a device. But it's important to think of the power of addressability in terms of measurement. So we can measure at that household level or at a device level or even at an individual level. And so the ability to measure all sorts of different impressions. So it could be linear TV impressions, it could be addressable TV impressions, it could be digital video impressions. And by being able to measure at that household level, so essentially that means generating an ad exposure at that level, that can be used for measuring impressions, it can be used for measuring ratings or deriving ratings, as well as for attribution. And in the case of attribution, essentially what you're doing is using those ad exposures, passing them on to an attribution partner who matches it to performance data. That could be website visits, location visits, sales, whatever the performance metrics are, and be able to then build what's called an attribution model to understand the relative impact of the different ad exposures. So that lets you understand how the different channels perform both against each other and how they complement each other. So in the sense of a marketing and sales funnel, you get to understand sort of how your broader reach campaigns impact your digital marketing channels and your digital activation channels, and ultimately sales behaviors. So it's very powerful to be able to have sort of this broad understanding, and it comes from that ability to use that data at a granular level, always anonymized, but understanding at that granular level the different places where that consumer has been reached.
So do you think performance around addressable is kind of a new thing? Is it something is it being adopted, or is there much demand for it? And addressable is expensive, so I assume this is an important part of it.
Very important part. I think the challenge has been that originally measurement of addressable had been limited to the addressable campaigns. And what's new here is the ability to combine the addressable exposures with the linear exposures, perhaps with digital video exposures, to understand the role that addressable can play. And once you understand you have a better understanding of that role, then you can also use it more effectively. So for example, let's say that we already knew that a household that was in our target had already been reached enough times with linear. Well, then I wouldn't necessarily want to target them with an addressable impression because the CPM on an addressable impression is much higher, right? On the other hand, there are some households that are very hard to reach with linear. So the ability to actually use addressable to reach those households that are hard to reach on linear is very powerful, right? So that's kind of a combination of how you would use those two things. And again, you can bring it back down together because in many cases you're reaching them through both linear and addressable, and you want to understand the incremental impact that that has on the performance.
And I wanted to ask you about the big news this week with Ampersand, your
Ampersand, yes.
You're a sister company. Comcast is a part owner. I know you're very much part of it. Tell us about your thoughts about the rebranding and their opportunity and what that means, for the industry and the role of Comcast in it.
Sure. So first about the rebrand, NCC Media has been a long-established player in the industry, traditionally associated with essentially as a reseller of local cable media, aggregating opportunities across many operators. That's sort of the old perception, and NCC has evolved quite a bit, so it was due for a rebrand, a reset, if you will. And I love the idea of Ampersand in the sense that it is an and proposition. It's about multiple MVPDs, so that's and. It's about MVPDs working with programmers, that's and. It's also about TV and video, or TV and data, or data and video, so it's all about and, right? And so I do think that makes sense conceptually. I love the logo, it's very graphically interesting, and so I think the rebrand hopefully will take them into this new world where they're already playing, but they needed to sort of reset the image and perspective around their brand, right? From a partnership perspective, you're right, Comcast is a part owner of Ampersand, and and we collaborate on a number of fronts. So we work together with them in terms of enabling them with data so that they can actually run campaigns across the broader footprint, across the multiple MVPDs that participate. We're also helping in terms of working with them on more advanced capabilities around audience-based planning, addressable targeting, both on TV and on video, and then the measurement capabilities that we discussed in the prior question.